What's up guys, Jackson Pios here, PhD in Clinical and Sports Nutrition. In this video, I'm going to review the training and diet methods of Baki Hanma and discuss whether what we see in the anime actually lines up with the scientific evidence. I think a question many of us would like answered is, what do we have to do to build the demon back? For those of you who don't know, Baki Hanma is the main protagonist of the manga and anime franchise Baki, which follows his progress towards his ultimate goal of being stronger than his father Yujiro, the strongest fighter in the world. The franchise runs across 3 series: the OG, Baki the Grappler, then Baki, and lastly, Baki Hanma, which you probably watched on Netflix. One easy way to know when someone hasn't watched much anime is if they tell you that Baki is a great anime. Now, I did enjoy the original Grappler series, but let's be honest, those Netflix productions weren't great. Just one fight after the other. It got old and predictable for me pretty quickly. But with that said, we do get the chance to see some of the greatest physiques that have ever graced an anime screen, and that's what we're going to discuss here. So let's get into it. Starting with the original series, Baki the Grappler, we see Baki move into the woods to start training with Ando to become stronger. Early on, we see Baki start his training with chopping wood, climbing up ropes, and performing bodyweight push-ups. This type of training is what most people would refer to as functional training, which refers to a type of training that improves your proficiency or capacity to complete daily tasks. Now, it's not likely that Baki has any future intentions of chopping down trees and climbing up ropes in his daily routine. But with that said, bodyweight training can be a very good way for beginners to develop a solid strength foundation and can be a good way for them to establish mind-muscle connections. So considering that, I think this type of training would be a reasonable starting point for a young teen like Baki. It's also fair to expect that as a teenager with little training experience, performing these movement patterns are likely to have a positive performance carryover to martial arts. I should point out though that this style of training is not ideal for muscle growth or maximal strength development if you've been performing some form of resistance training or weight training for a number of years. So next, we see Baki performing various martial arts focused training, such as hitting the heavy bag and punching and kicking trees in the woods. This type of training is what I would consider functional training, as it's training to improve proficiency in the specific skill that you intend to perform, which in Baki's case is obviously fighting. This also highlights what's referred to in the science as the training principle of specificity, which states that to become elite in a particular skill or sport, one should train in a way that mimics that specific performance. For example, if you want to get better at jogging, you should do more jogging, not bike riding. On a related note, we do see Baki doing a lot of running through the woods with a large bag on his back. Weighted runs or hill runs are definitely a great way to improve cardiovascular fitness as well as leg endurance. If you're quite early on in your weightlifting journey, weighted running is also likely to provide you with leg strength and leg size gains, as you'll be taking advantage of what we generally refer to as the noob gains, which is a phenomenon where a beginner trainee responds very quickly to a low load training stimulus. Interestingly, using weighted vests to enhance fat loss has actually been confirmed in the scientific research, and I'll put that study on the screen now. Now, although Baki is shredded already and it's clear that he doesn't need any fat loss assistance, using weighted vests for walking or running during a fat loss phase can be a very effective way to avoid fat loss plateaus. Weighted vests achieve this by offsetting the usual drop in calorie burn during daily movement that happens once you start losing body weight and body fat. Later in the series, we see Baki continue to perform running as part of his regular training routine. Endurance training, like running, often referred to as aerobic training, is fantastic for expending calories and for improving your fitness level. It's important to note, however, that performing too much endurance training can actually be detrimental to your muscle growth. A number of scientific studies have referred to this occurrence as the interference effect, which refers to findings that showed muscle and strength gains were reduced when endurance training was combined with weight training versus just completing the weight training alone. If you are looking to build both strength and size while also improving your fitness and lowering your body fat, then research tells us that weights and cardio sessions should be on alternate days if possible. And if that's not possible, then splitting them up between the AM and the PM to minimize these interference effects. Now let's talk about Bucky's eating. During Bucky's early time with Ando, Bucky points out that Ando has gained a lot of size while a mountain of meat sits in between them. It is true that a high protein diet is necessary to build muscle size. However, in practical terms, the science tells us that a daily protein intake of 2 to 2.5 grams per kilogram of our body weight is all that's needed to maximize our muscle growth. Any protein consumed beyond that isn't going towards muscle growth. Another issue with this mountain of meat as a meal is that protein is a very poor fuel source or energy source for training. Instead of having 2,000 grams of protein in one hit, which is what it looks like here, they would be much better lowering their meat or protein intake and increasing their carbohydrate intake with things like rice, potato, and fruits. If they did this, they'd be able to train harder for longer with no detriment to their muscle growth efforts. Fast forwarding, once Ando gets injured, Bucky has a fire lit within him and he becomes obsessed with getting bigger. We see a montage of him basically eating everything in sight to the point where his stomach looks pregnant. To get bigger and to build muscle, we need to be consuming more calories than we're burning, as this creates a calorie surplus. However, research tells us that a calorie surplus should only be in the range of around 300 to 600 calories above the calorie intake that's needed to maintain our body weight. This means that if you maintain your body weight on 2,500 calories, the amount that you should be eating to build muscle is only 2,800 to 3,100 calories. If you eat more than this, muscle growth is unlikely to happen any faster, but your fat gain will be a hell of a lot faster. So for bulking or trying to gain size, a seafood diet like Bucky is not the best way. It will put muscle on you, but it will also put fat on you, which doesn't look good and it may interfere with your performance. If you're not sure how many calories you should be eating on a day to grow muscle, that's okay. Firstly, get a scale and start weighing yourself every morning in a fasted state. Science tells us that the optimal rate of weight gain for muscle building is around 0.3 to 0.5% of your body weight per week. So if you weigh 80 kilos, this would mean a weekly weight gain of 250 to 400 grams per week would be ideal. So you track your daily body weight and then you compare the weekly averages to ensure that you're staying close to this weekly gain range. If you fall above or below it, then just increase or decrease your calorie intake by 5 to 10% to bring yourself back closer to an ideal progress rate. So taking a turn back to training again, we do see snippets of Bucky performing conventional weights training with movements such as the bench press, decline sit-ups, and bicep curls. This form of training is the optimal approach if you're looking to gain muscle size. Research tells us that a muscle group such as the chest will grow best when trained in a repetition range of 6 to 20 reps, as long as those sets are taken close to muscular failure and for 10 to 20 sets per week. I generally recommend most of my clients to split up their weekly sets for each muscle group across 2 sessions in the week. For example, 5 sets on Monday for chest and then 5 sets on Thursday for chest. You could also combine other muscle groups within these sessions. For example, a Monday weight session could look like 5 working sets for chest, 5 for triceps, and then 5 for shoulders, and then repeated on Thursday, but with using different exercises. Rotating your exercises like this has 2 benefits. It takes advantage of another training principle, the principle of variation, which suggests that over time the body adapts to a certain exercise, making it less effective. And secondly, research tells us that a muscle group grows best when it's trained through a variety of angles and different ranges of motion. Now, moving on to the more recent series of Bucky. After a fight, we see Bucky looking exhausted, depleted, and very skinny. Retsu serves him up a huge buffet of food and instructs him to eat it. After very strenuous training or competition, the body is typically very low with energy and is experiencing high rates of muscle protein breakdown. This is why it's very important to eat quickly after training to begin replenishing those energy stores and to kickstart the recovery process. We see Bucky eating a lot of protein here, which is key to reversing muscle protein breakdown and switching on muscle protein synthesis, which is responsible for muscle regeneration and growth. Research tells us that approximately 0.5 grams of protein per kilogram of your body weight should be consumed shortly after training. Now, along with protein, something just as important is to consume carbohydrates after your training. Retsu provides Bucky with a large bucket of sugar water and instructs him to drink it as dessert. Now, there's no athlete in the world that's going to need 14 kilos of sugar water after their training, but what Retsu is doing here is actually quite smart. When we perform high intensity exercise, the primary fuel source for this is glycogen. Now, glycogen is the stored form of carbohydrates in our muscles and in our liver. When training is very strenuous and for a long time, these storage centers deplete to critical levels. And when that happens, energy levels drop, we have an increased risk of muscle loss and our recovery abilities are impaired. So that's why as sports nutritionists, we recommend consuming a quickly digested form of carbohydrate like sugar shortly after hard training sessions to refill these glycogen storage centers quickly. The anime actually has a very cool scene which shows Bucky basically blowing up like a balloon after drinking the sugar water, and this is highlighting his muscle glycogen stores being filled back up again. So that's all I've got for you guys today. I hope you did enjoy at least some of that analysis and commentary. Surprisingly, despite the anime being very unrealistic in many of the departments, when it comes to the nutrition and training practices, some of it is actually relatively accurate. I appreciate you legends for making it this far, and if you'd like to see more anime reactions, please drop me a comment below with your suggestions and I'll make sure that it happens. Peace.